Well, hi everybody. Welcome to week 4 of our New Hampshire primary MOOC. I'm Dante Scala, Associate Professor of Political Science at UNH.
And I'm Andy Smith, Director of the UNH Survey Center, and we're here at the Diamond Library at UNH. And the 4th week, we figured it's time to answer the viewer mail. So it's mail day. So Dante, what's the first question that we have from the participants?
Our first question is from Brian and Nancy Johnson, who asked, an earlier video in the course indicated there was a penalty for candidates who started a campaign too early. What does this have to do with a window for primaries? We're confused, and I think that might have been our bad on this one. Maybe we weren't as clear as we should have been. The window applies not to candidates campaigning, because they can campaign for as long as they like, but it applies to when states can hold their primaries. And that relates to another term which is known as the window, in which certain states have a window in which they can participate.
Right, the parties set the window for the contest that will determine who their nominees are. So this year, both parties have the windows at about the same time. They start March 1st and they end about at the middle of June. But there are 4 states that have exemptions to the window. New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, and Nevada are able to hold their primaries before March 1st. But it's probably some of the problem is that a lot of people would hope that there would be a window on when candidates could start campaigning for president, so we don't have to go through these 3- and 4-year-long processes for it.
Exactly. Now these are also, New Hampshire is also known as one of the carve-out states. So in other words, the parties carve out an exemption and allow some of these traditional early voting states, Iowa, New Hampshire, now Nevada is included as well as South Carolina, to go to the front of the line and have their traditional position, although Nevada is kind of a latecomer to all this.
Right, they're the most recent one who's got that sort of an exemption.
Question 2, Andy.
Question 2, it comes from Doug Caro. Why wouldn't a final national open primary with the leading candidates from both parties, based on primary election results, and the top 2 vote getters going on the final election, be a reasonable alternative to the current system? So some sort of a shakedown and then take the top candidates and have a runoff for them at the end.
Now, certain states have experimented with this. California, for example, has a so-called jungle primary in which all the candidates, Democratic and Republican, are put on a common ballot, and then the top 2, regardless of whether they're both Democrats, both Republicans, or one of each, the top 2 vote getters graduate to the general election, and the rest go home.
So Mr. Caro's, his question is kind of an interesting proposal. Say both parties winnow their field in the primaries down to 4 or 5 candidates, and then have an open primary nationwide just with those 4 or 5 candidates, after we've already gone through the cycle of the early state primaries. Kind of an interesting proposal, but boy, it would take a lot of heavy lifting to get that through the state, through the national party rules committees to do something like that. I think it might be something that would run into the same problems that we've had with other plans to reform the primary system, that local politics, state politics, party politics, and the political interest of candidates really come head to head.
And Doug's question relates to a larger question, which is about how much influence political parties actually have on the candidates. Do candidates actually follow the party platforms that are approved at conventions, or are they basically dead letters as soon as they're done? I guess the answer is yes and no. I mean, candidates don't necessarily subscribe chapter and verse to the party platforms, but you wouldn't expect the nominee to depart too far from, say, the basic principles contained in a party's platform.
Right, and I think that's usually what's happened in recent years. It's the candidates, the final candidates, the nominee chooses what they want to emphasize or not emphasize in their final campaign.
Yeah. Okay. Question 3, our final question, is from Barbara McCauley, as well as several other students who had a similar question. And the question is this, Andy: what is going on in this primary? And I think especially Barbara and company are especially referring to the Republican field, which thus far has upended all of the conventional wisdom to date about how these things are supposed to go.
Well, I think the first thing that happened with the Republicans is there's no front runner at the beginning of this race. There was no person who was next in line, which is traditionally what the Republicans have had. We had people identifying Jeb Bush as the front runner early on, but if he even was a front runner, he was an extremely weak front runner. And With that said, it's an open field. And certainly Donald Trump coming in with the level of money and celebrity that he had, independent of politics, really is shaking up the field. We've never seen a celebrity on his level enter the field really in either party's primaries.
Yeah, our colleagues in political science often talk about candidates surging, and then they experience a period of scrutiny, and then they decline. This comes from our colleagues Lynn Vavreck and John Sides. And what's interesting about Trump, Andy, is how he has seemed to ignore that cycle. Like, he's surged, we expect him to go through scrutiny and then decline. He's had lots of scrutiny, but not much decline.
Well, I think that's one of the things about Trump that makes him unique. He's pretty much immune to saying anything that's going to offend anybody more than he's already offended people for the years he's been on television. The second thing that I think that's interesting with Trump is he doesn't stay on the same point. He is constantly looking for a new angle, either of attack for his colleagues, attacks for the Democrats, or attacks at the media. And I think that's really kept the other Republicans on the defensive and caught them a lot of times flat-footed.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind, we've still got 90 days to go before the New Hampshire primary, so a lot could change, including Donald Trump's fate. And with that, we're going to leave it there, but keep sending in your questions and go watch week 4.
And we'll see you next week.